Dave, welcome back to the Bitcoin Infinity show.
Thank you for having me.
You've been here before, so I think we'll skip the introduction part and just go straight into what we want to talk about today. What do we want to talk about today?
Well, what do you think of the government?
I fucking hate it. And what do you... I think we're in agreement there. So, yeah, have you read Rothbard's The Anatomy of the State?
I have.
What did you think about that book?
I mean, it's crazy that these ideas have been around for so long, and that the idea that the state is not our friend is not a new idea, but was so successfully buried by the, you'll see it, academics, I guess.
Yeah. And it's such a weird concept to begin with. Like, there's nothing natural at all about some people, quote unquote, legitimately getting to control other people by force. I always found that odd, even as a kid. Like, I can still remember to this day, like, why are things the way they are? Why do we have to be controlled? Like, why are some people better than others? Could never get it. Is that how you see it too?
Yeah, and it's I didn't always see it that way. You know, I grew up programmed by the machine to believe that there was some kind of a moral right to control that, and I never really got past that point, right? Like, I never really got to the point of being like, okay, well, why is it this group of people who gets to control all of our lives? And it wasn't until much later in life that I actually started like thinking about what the government is, what the concept of a nation state is, and where it might have come from. And like there obviously was a reason for it to exist. And, you know, if you think back to the, like what humans would have been like in very small groups, the moment that we had capital, basically the moment we invented agriculture, we had something to steal. And so inevitably, the people who are useful, who are producing things, would have banded together to concentrate their resources a little bit to be able to have a greater magnitude of violence to keep their capital safe. And that's pretty much the spot where the whole logic of the nation state stems from. And it just like, it became this game of one-upmanship for most of human history of how much violence can we concentrate and how many resources can we seize until pretty much the invention of the nuke, where it became no longer relevant to further concentrate your violence. The next one was the invention of the AK-47 started the trend towards the efficiency of violence being more important than the magnitude of violence. And that changed the whole logic on the cost of attack and defense. And, you know, that's why for the first time, I think we're in an era where the usefulness of the nation state is diminishing, especially as it gathers and controls and redistributes more resources. It's becoming a lot less beneficial to the average person to be a part of a nation state. And I think that's like, we're kind of at a tipping point where more and more people are starting to realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of the evolution of weaponry, I love to think of Bitcoin in the context of that. I don't view, I'm not a fan of the Jason Lowry theory that Bitcoin can be weaponized, because I think it's more akin to armor than a weapon. So if you look at weapon history, you first have like fisticuffs, and then pointy stick, and then eventually sword, and then eventually shield, which is like shielding you from the sword. And when you invent armor, the knights could rape and pillage as much as they wanted and claim that they were kings and feudal lords and stuff, because no one could get to them because they had armor. So armor was more important for a long time than the actual weapons. Same with the castles and walls and moats and stuff, stopping people from, like, defense is just as important as offense in warfare, yeah. Right? Then you get into siege weapons and eventually gunpowder. And gunpowder sort of killed the armor aspect of it. Now, it wasn't a very good thing to walk around in clunky metal armor anymore. But Bitcoin is like, it's such a beautiful thinking of it as armor is so beautiful because it's armor, intellectual armor, if you will. It makes the attack less profitable or not profitable at all because you die with your Bitcoin. So you can't steal them if you attack the other person. And that I just find that super fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. So those examples are really interesting because the example of the armor and the moats and the castles was from a time when the efficiency of violence was quite low, and so was the magnitude of violence. And there was still a very high cost to defense, and that's why those who were able to achieve proper defense were able to be the knights, the lords, etc., who had enough resources to maintain their own defenses. And it changed, with the invention of gunpowder, with the invention of more and more efficient small arms. So the logic is completely shifted. And I think Bitcoin is a really fundamental shift that is a little bit downstream even from the violence, because Bitcoin is the capital in the first place, right? And so if we're talking about the cost to defend our capital, Bitcoin has fundamentally changed how much it costs to protect, store, and move your capital to such a drastic degree. There would have been times when if you had a huge amount of money and you're stuck in a city besieged by the enemy, like you couldn't physically take your money with you. It'd be too heavy to move. And now we've got the most pristine form of capital that is the best representation of the value that we've created with our time, that we can, when we turn our time into capital, we can then take that capital with us wherever we go. We can hide it. We can keep it safe quite deeply. And so I think that's part of that big shift in logic that ultimately means that the usefulness of a large scale nation state is at its end.
Yeah, because we're drifted so far away from that now, but like the main use case for a nation state is collectivized defense, right? But even so most people, when you ask them, do we need a state at all? Like almost everyone thinks that the state should at least do defense, even if they're very right-wing or very conservative or even libertarian-leaning. There are libertarians that still want a small state. I think even Mises himself wanted like the state to take care of defense because it's for some reason that couldn't be solved on the free market. And the thing is, I've had many conversations with many great thinkers about this. One of them being Max Hillebrand of Wasabi Wallet fame, who pointed out to me like in the Israel-Palestine conflict, for instance, like without, I'm not going to get into that whole picking sides thing, like that. Never in a lifetime. I think with any war, my position is stop the killing as soon as possible, and then sort it out. Like argue. Don't kill each other, please. Like but the Israel-Palestine conflict, Israel has a weapon system that costs like $1 million every time they send up this robotic drone defense system that is only there to shoot down whatever projectiles comes in over Israel. And the Palestinians, they fire rocks with an explosive in a pipe, which costs like maybe a maximum of $100 to produce. Like so you have this enormous discrepancy in the cost of the weapons systems, but at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer paying for all of it, either with their lives or with their money or with their time and effort, and it's equally vulgar every time. So and like I'm living in Europe, I see the I listen to American politics a lot and try to follow along, and it's just brutal to hear all the warmongering going on, even from intellectuals that I highly respect. But they have this seemingly this point of view that this nation needs to survive or this nation needs to defend itself. I'm obviously talking about Ukraine here, but in other conflicts too. Without ever considering like the tens of thousands of 18-year-olds that are simply murdered by this machine. And like, I don't get how people's priority is not like stop the violence. If an action can lead to stop the violence, that is obviously the best course of action, and then sort everything else after that. Like, to me, that's always the priority. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's madness. there's this madness inherent in the idea of the nation state at this point, wherein, for all of really recorded human history, nations have been going to war against each other. And that fundamental idea that is even something that humans do, I think, is something that should be challenged, because it really comes down to, there's an interesting conversation I had recently where somebody asked me to define evil. And the best answer that I got to, much simplified version of the 10 Commandments, is evil is to take without consent.
Yeah.
Whether you're taking somebody's property, their life, their time, that is really the only thing that I think you can define as evil. And everything else that is evil can be described as that. And that very concept of my country has a moral right to go and get these resources, or go and get this land, or use violence to take from others is a thing that I find fundamentally evil. And that's part of what needs to be challenged about that construct of the nation state, that not only do these people have the self-imposed moral authority to take our resources and reallocate them, they've given themselves the authority to commit acts of evil on others in the world on our behalf. And that's insane.
Yeah, I just came to think about, like, this is basically the non-aggression principle, the underlying principle of libertarianism. Like as few involuntary exchanges as possible. Like, as everything should be done with consent. Like, people should consensually interact with one another. I just thought of it when you mentioned the 10 Commandments. I thought of them. Isn't the first one that you shall have no gods except me, other gods except me? Isn't that a violation of you shall not steal? Because you're stealing a right to choose your own God.
Absolutely.
So they're paradoxical, aren't they?
Yeah, they're the two big ones, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, I think resonate pretty well with most people. And you can kind of combine those into thou shalt not take without consent.
Exactly.
And, but the other ones are like, it's funny. I view religion, like organized religion, mostly as some, like a bunch of sort of ancient, like, rules for society, like things like food safety, and just they kind of included like the general rules for how they wanted their society to run into the religious texts. And so there's all these things that like don't really make any sense anymore. Graven images and like just wouldn't really make sense in the modern context, but all of that stuff is still packaged around, the important parts: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal.
Yeah, but there are also proto-states, right? Like, it is this collective imagination thing that people can gather around. Like, human beings, like there's this fascinating historical thing where whenever a civilization invents ceremonial burial, the borders of that village, that's where civilizations start to expand. And why is that? It's because some leader realized that they could fool 18-year-olds that if you go and kill those people over there, you will get a better life and 20 virgins in the afterlife. So there's a very dark side to that. I think like these religious principles, they come from good intentions, but they get co-opted by narcissists and by psychopaths who see a way to use that human instinct to belief in a deity for their own benefit, like, and fool people that they're closer to God or something stupid like that, and thereby they can control people. So in the organized form, they're very dangerous. And like the way my thinking has changed on this subject as I before and after Bitcoin is that I now view statism as not only just another religion, but maybe the most dangerous one, because you've removed the imaginary friend from the equation entirely, and all you're left with are real friends that aren't friends at all. They're your absolute enemies. Like they are the psychopaths that want to control you, but that's all that's left. You have a dear leader instead of a bearded man in the sky, and that's even more dangerous, in my opinion.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. It's the same kind of psychopaths who created organized religion and then used the idea that they were a unique conduit to God to give authority to the fact that they wanted to be the ones to control all the resources. And then at some point, humans woke up enough to start challenging that idea that maybe like your right to do this is not divine, but they didn't actually like challenge the right to do that itself. They challenged just the reasoning behind who it was that got that power. And inevitably the people who did that challenging were like, well, obviously we should be the ones who now have the power. And, you've got the same sort of archetypes running the government today who were probably making up these religions thousands of years ago. And it's interesting. I think that's why there's so many pedophiles among politicians and priests, is because they both feed into this like weird desire to have power over others.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. It's really vile, but like pedophilia is obviously bad, but so is like any will to control other people. Like it's a lighter version maybe, but it's still an aspect of the same type of psychology. You want to be dominant, and you want to dominate through force and threats of violence. So in your mind, is a threat of violence, is that violence or not? Like, are threats actually violence?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that threats can infringe upon the rights of others in the same way that visible violence can, and that's kind of the important part.
Yeah, they can make people act differently.
Yeah.
So with that said, is everyone at war? Like, are we all at war because we're under constant threat from the government that if we don't pay our taxes, they will throw us in jail?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you were to describe a group of people who live in our society and occasionally show up and take some of your things, and also have a whole bunch of other reasons that they've thought up that are good enough for them to use violence against you. Like that sounds like a dystopian, like futuristic nightmare, but it's really just what the world is, right? Like this is the state, this is the government, and they live amongst us, they steal from us, and they commit violence against us if we object to them stealing from us.
Yeah, and they reserve the right for themselves to kidnap our kids for like 6 hours a day for 12 years. And add to that the fact that pedophiles are more common among this group than any other group. Yeah, when you see it like that, it's like aliens would just shake their heads. Like, what are these people doing? Why?
But there's no wonder they haven't invented interstellar travel, because this one group of idiots is just confiscating and wasting most of the resources. How are they ever supposed to get off? How are they supposed to progress as a civilization? When I first started thinking about these things, and when I came to these conclusions that no, we'd actually be better off if the whole thing was abandoned altogether. Like we can never get to anything good when the state exists. Like it is just there's no difference between this and the mafia. Like when I came to that conclusion, your knee-jerk reaction is to be, it's a kind of cynical thing, right? It's a cynical thought. But as you start to study free markets and human action, praxeology, and Austrian economics, you get a bigger appreciation for that people have created all of these wonderful things, and we live magnificent lives today compared to our grandfathers. Like we have devices that, like this phone, that are like a millionaire 50 years ago could only dream of this thing. Like this wasn't even in James Bond's wet dream, and these things exist despite all the threats of violence that are everywhere. So even this handicapped interventionist free market that we have, that is not free at all, it still manages to turn sand into mobile phones. It's fucking awesome. But it also, like, most people are very confused about what the good forces are and what the bad forces are. This is strictly a product of the telephone again, if you're listening. Like it is the product of people making consensual decisions. Like, I will buy this from you, and therefore I can build this and sell that to that person.
It is all that. No government mandated mobile phones to exist, or anything else for that matter. Not even roads, or weapons. It's all voluntary exchange. And this is what I find so fascinating. When you see that, and when you start seeing things through a ANCAP lens, or through even more through a Bitcoiner lens, when you think about a finite money supply and stuff like that, you just see the world this is obviously good and this is obviously bad. The free market competes by and provides goods. The government provides bads, and that's the competition there. That's the competition there. It's super simple. Let's talk Bitcoin security. I mean, the first thing you have to do, this is the best practices stuff, right? You have to take your coins off an exchange. Everyone knows that. You have to take custody of your own Bitcoins, but that means holding your own private keys. The easiest way to do that is to get a hardware wallet so you can keep your coins offline. And we recommend this little thingy. It's called a Bitbox. You go to bitbox.swiss and use code Infinity for 5% off this thing. It's our favorite hardware wallet. It's very easy to use. It's good on privacy, and it's good for all kinds of other reasons too. And another thing that every Bitcoiner should do is write down their seed phrase. So usually when you fire up a hardware wallet, you get a seed phrase, 12 or 24 words that do not only represent your Bitcoin, they actually are your Bitcoin, these words. The 12 magic words are actually magic. And you could use a pen, but I don't advise people to ever use a pen, because if you use pen and paper and your house burns down or something, that paper is gone forever. For that reason, this thing has been invented many times by many companies. It's a metal seed plate. And this one is from our favorite seed plate manufacturer, Stamp Seed. You get this beautiful hammer and you can stamp your seed into this metal plate. And this particular one, you can do your own design. Here on the backside, this has no design on it, but there's a beautiful everything divided seed plate that you can get. If you use code Infinity, you get 15% off everything on their store. So stampseed.com, go there and figure out more. And if you want to buy what we call a shit ton of Bitcoin, you should probably secure them in a multi-sig solution of some kind that have more professional custody. And for that, we recommend the bitcoinadvisor.com. This is a bunch of happy Australian people that are more than willing to help you and handhold you into Bitcoin multi-sig custody. One key is held by you, one by them, and one by a third party. And you need 2 out of the 3 keys to unlock your Bitcoin. This is for Bitcoin inheritance and for people who want to buy, a shit ton of Bitcoin. So secure your Bitcoin. Go to Stampseed, go to Bitbox, go to the Bitcoin Advisor, and brush your teeth.
Yeah, that's it's really incredible, actually, because one of the only things that I was ever taught about finances in school was about the magic of compound interest. And they tell you that, if you put in $200 a week at 4.5%, you're going to be a millionaire in 19 years. That's at 4.5%, right? And we, as you said, have gone through, pretty much because of our ability to harness petroleum and the sheer energy density that petroleum offers us. In the last 150 years, we've gone through the most explosive period of human growth and the greatest increase in human prosperity in human history. And we've done that in spite of the fact that we've had this giant monkey on our back. And if you think about back to compound interest, if 4% makes you a millionaire at $200 a week, what does we go back to the invention of income taxes? Taxes were very, very low back then as a total of all the useful things produced, right? And so the government was confiscating a fairly small percentage of the resources, but that percentage that they've been confiscating has been increasing the whole time. So, you go back to the 80s, and maybe you might even have to go back further than that for this, and there was a point in time where the government was probably taking 40% of the resources and squandering them. And not only are they squandering them, in a lot of cases, they're actually using the resources that they've confiscated to destroy the things that the useful people have created. We've had multiple world wars. The government overall has been a massively net negative to the furtherment of overall human prosperity, right? They destroyed value. They've destroyed resources. And now we're at this point where this machine that never stops eating, never stops growing, has grown to such an extent that I think we're finally getting to the point, especially because they've attacked the usefulness of petroleum. They're trying to phase that out, which is a giant waste of resources and a giant distraction from the task of furthering the growth of human prosperity. But I think we've just gotten to a point where they're only now starting to confiscate enough resources as a whole of the economy between taxes, user fees, inflation, every which way that they confiscate resources. The growth that our incredible human ingenuity has brought us is only now starting to be caught by the grift. And the size of the grift has grown so large that even with incredible technology that we have and the remaining shreds of capitalism left in this world, we can no longer outpace the grift.
No, and it results in people working longer and longer hours, and like a smaller and smaller part of the population actually working, and the ones who are work their asses off, and everyone else is like on a feeding tube from the government somewhere. Oh, it's speaking of compound interest, back to that, because that's compound. My interest in that compounds. The thing is, people may think, hang on a minute, how can this be a thing with a finite money supply, and how does interest rates and stuff work on a Bitcoin standard? And the TLDR on that is that we can have exponential growth. Oh, we can have way more exponential growth in terms of purchasing power, but not in terms of you don't need to expand the money supply for that. If expanding the money supply would enrich people, you could just write zeros at the end of every bill and everyone would be richer for it. But adding zeros adds zero value. That's the problem. So my favorite example is this apple tree farmer that has one apple tree, and he can feed X amount of people. The next year, if he can keep all of his profits, he can get another tree and feed the double amount. Third year, 4 trees. Fourth year, 8 trees, and so on and so forth. So it grows exponentially. But if he's taxed half of his profit the first year, he never gets to the second tree. So we never see the world that could have been. We never see the exponential growth that could have happened because of all of this interventionism. And all of it is bad. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a tariff or an income tax or a VAT, or all of it is bad. Like a subsidy is bad. Everything is bad because it distorts the price signal. And this is what Mises pointed out so elegantly, like more than 50 years ago, that the problem with socialism is not an incentive problem, because you have an incentive to work if you have a gun to your head at all times. And if you have a stomping boot, you will work. Like, slaves worked their asses off. That's not the problem. The problem is the price signals. All the price signals get distorted by the interventionism, and resources get misallocated. They don't go to where they ought to go to. Like the Milton Friedman example of the pencil. No one on the earth can construct a pencil from scratch, and no one designed it. It came like the free market made it happen, and the wood in it is from one continent, and the graphite from another, and the paint from a third, with no coordination mechanism except free market price signaling. And that's what you destroy when you take away people's ability to do things with consent. When faced with, like, should I buy this or should I buy this other thing that is government subsidized? So should I buy a diesel generator or a solar panel, for instance? It makes both of them more expensive in the long run if the free market isn't allowed to decide which is which. Because what you get then at the end is like what you got in the Soviet Union, which is a screw making factory that creates one screw that weighs a ton because someone on top told them to make a ton of screws. You don't get any intervention. Just slows down the process. It retards it, literally and metaphorically. It gets slower and more stupid. That's what happened. It's retarded. So yeah. I'm ranting on here, but I should let you rant too. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, imagine what would have happened if instead of the free market being able to achieve consensus on the value of the pencil, that was left to the government. And you have a special interest group that would decide that they would like the ability to write on things in an erasable way, and then that special interest group would petition their local representative to help them with solving this very clear problem. Brings to mind this one of my favorite quotes. It's from a book called "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress."
Heinlein, right?
Yeah, it's about the moon trying to achieve independence from Earth, a colony on the moon. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but the quote is basically, that which I fear most are the sober, well-intentioned actions of good men giving to the government the power to do something that really seems like it needs doing. So that would be the case here. We would have a social or a special interest group lobbies the government, please create a writing tool. And this goes then into a committee. And, now we're into the other problem is we've got probably hundreds or thousands of man hours that have gone into the decision by this point to make the pencil rather than the market just figuring it out for us. And then you go into committee and some other special interest group would be like, well, we feel like this particular idea is discriminatory or leaves out the following groups because pencils are not inclusive for some reason that they've worked up. And next thing you know, the original goal of we want something that we can write on things that is erasable has just become lost in this mountain of bureaucracy. And they end up creating something that doesn't actually write on things and isn't erasable. That is literally the exact opposite of the original stated goals. And that's like, this kind of hyperbolic, but you can go through examples of government policies and they almost always look a lot like this, because exactly what you're talking about, where there's no price signal, there's no incentive for the person who's actually reallocating the capital that has been stolen to allocate it in a way that that achieves the end goals that were originally intended. Right? There's no feedback mechanisms in that portion of the economy anymore, and so yeah, I mean, it's something that we've got here in Canada. We're in Alberta. We've got a growing separatist movement out here, and I would very much like to be out of the country. But one gripe is that one major gripe that this part of the country has is that we pay what's called transfer payments, where we're the richest part of the country, and so we basically send very large amounts of money to the poorer provinces, and thereby we end up getting a pretty bad deal financially out of the country. And somebody said to me recently, like, it wouldn't be so bad if the government would just spend more money here. And it's like, I don't know if you want that. But I don't think we want the government's help. Like, I don't think we want their help with really just about anything in its current form, because there isn't much of anything that they can successfully help with.
No, absolutely not. Oh, all they say is a lie and all they have is stolen. Like, back to the pencil. Like, if some depressed public service worker stabs themselves in the leg with a pen, then you have a government-funded committee deciding that you need a safety pant, like a pair of safety pants to even get to use the pen in the first place. If you don't own this unnecessary pair of pants, you can't buy the pencil in the first place.
And you can only buy the pants if you have your pencil license.
Yes, exactly, and you get a catch-22 there. And if someone takes like pen is mightier than the sword, literally, and stabs their buddy with the pen, also from being frustrated, like at the school. So there's a school shooting, but this is not a shooting; it's a pen fight. Nobody ever thinks of banning public schooling when there's a school shooting, by the way. Like, is it the gun that is the problem, or the kidnapping institution that put all these kids together and made them frustrated enough to kill each other? Like, so the thing is, the pen, someone stabs someone with the pen, the murder gets thrown in jail. Who pays for the jail visit? Everyone else. Like, prisons are the same thing. We're paying for. We are not the victim. If someone takes something from me, I'm the victim. But if that guy gets caught and thrown into jail, everyone's a victim. Because it's probably more costly to keep the guy in jail than the thing he stole from me, because I don't own enough stuff to pay for even a fucking week for that guy in jail. So that, like, the entire thing is so insanely costly, and we never see the cost. It's always hidden from us. and they say they tax companies or they tax the rich or blah blah blah. Guess what? The consumer always pays. It trickles down, and then the consumer gets to pay always. Like, people who know the system can always get around the system. It's always the little guy that has to pay for it all. So yeah.
There's only so many resources in the world. And like the apple tree example, we the useful class cannot grow as fast as we would otherwise be able to grow because the moochers and the leechers are taking so many of our resources and misallocating them in so many ways, like committees about pencils and prisons for pencil scabbers.
Yeah. No, and I think the one of the main problems that people have with this is that the inability to understand exponentials to begin with, and also the lack of imagination to think that the world could be a better place. Everyone thinks it could be a worse place, but nobody ever imagines it could be a better place. And it becomes a better place all the time because of the free market. Like, we have it better than ever.
Well,
but yeah,
there's a book that I'm really looking forward to. I think it'll probably be out by the time this podcast comes out, by Dr. Gad Saad. He wrote a book that I really liked called The Parasitic Mind, about how bad ideas spread. And the new one is called Suicidal Empathy. And I think that's a really interesting concept. Something that I had a conversation about recently is the concept of the greater good, and how it very much leads to this kind of suicidal empathy, wherein, I think the greater good is something that a lot of people can get behind broadly at the highest level, where it's like, if you want to say, would you like it if the greatest number of people got the best outcomes? We like, sure. Yeah, that's positive, right?
Yeah.
And would I like other people's outcomes to generally improve? Absolutely. Right. And then you move a step beyond that, and it's like, would you be willing to reduce your own outcome if it could have an outsized impact for other people's lives? And I think for most people, the answer to that is yes, also, right? And that's a multi-layered conversation where it's like, with consent, I would be absolutely willing to give up some of my resources that are on the upper end of what you could call excessive resources that I could give to people who have fewer resources to improve their lives.
Bitcoiners do this all the time. Like, there's not a Bitcoiner I know that doesn't do this. We are very altruistic towards one another, and because we have good reason to be. Because Bitcoin functions better if we do. Like, it's
and so I'm willing to do that. I think most people are willing to do that, right? And so that idea kind of underpins the legitimacy of the concept of taxes, but people don't believe that the involuntary nature of taxes is evil. That's the leap that most people are not making. And I think that's the really key part, because like, if we lived in a world where the government was not involuntarily confiscating what I would say right now is the vast majority of all resources produced by humanity, it's got to be like, it's got to be an area of 80%. If you were to include every level of taxes and money printing in the total government grift, if you were to work that backwards and say, okay, I'm in my early 40s, I've been in the workforce for 25 years or so. How much money would I have if, instead of putting $200 a week into a 4% yield, what would be the equivalent of putting 50, 60, 70% of my income into my own decision making, essentially, right? And
no, it's
my own capital deployment. Like, almost everyone who is at least moderately successful now would be a billionaire. In today's spending power.
It's immeasurable, because you don't only have the exponentials, but you have the butterfly effect, like endeavors you never embarked on, like things you never did because you were tied down like this.
Yeah. And how much would you give to charity if you were a billionaire? Like, a lot, I'm guessing. I think most of us would give a lot to charity if we were billionaires, but the difference is we would be giving it to charities that we believed were useful, charities that could show us that they were accomplishing something that we thought actually needed to happen in a way that was not resource wasteful.
Yeah, And charities is one thing, but like that's sort of, I believe, like thinking that the only altruistic thing you can do is give to a charity is sort of somewhat limiting. I mean, just buying stuff and selling stuff is in itself helping humanity propel forward. Like that is lowering all prices everywhere. So like, I always like to ask people the simplest questions when it comes to things like this, and one of them is if you practice doing something, do you usually get better or worse at doing that thing? And the answer is obviously better. So the follow-up question is what everyone forgets. Like, so why aren't all prices falling forever? And the only reason that is because someone's printing money. So it's that simple. And if you switch to Bitcoin, you see it in real time. You see that all prices are falling forever because Bitcoin is honest. It reflects this increase in productivity in an honest way for the first time in human history, which is just mind-blowing. And the other thing is like even more, that is kind of a complex, simple question, because it's, to most people, that's too far off for them to even imagine. But a simpler one would then be like, why do people in the public sector pay taxes? I mean, they're a government expense, so why do they pay taxes? If they're funded by taxes, why do they pay them? And the only reason is to keep up the facade that everyone's equal and that the public sector is somehow as valuable as the private one. Well, spoiler alert, it isn't. It's a cost. Like, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't enforced. Like, that's the thing. Healthcare would exist, roads would exist, but only because people paid for them with consent, meaning that they would be cheaper because you had a free market competition everywhere. And there is no good or service that is outside of this mechanism.
It's interesting. It goes back to the previous conversation, and I don't know that I'm 100% settled on the answer of this, of like whether or not there is a case for the state at the smallest level. Essentially an entity that maintains a monopoly on violence on a geographical region in order to provide the protection of physical safety and property rights to voluntary users.
That's a super tricky one. And I don't really know where, like, I don't think anyone knows where they stand on that one, because we never experienced such a scenario. There's always a monopoly on violence in every geographical area on Earth. In some places, it's more expensive to actually use that monopoly, like on Antarctica, for instance. It's quite expensive for someone to go and kill someone on Antarctica.
Yeah, but I think there is actually an example in Mexico right now where there is not a monopoly on violence, and instead you have two roughly equal entities competing for the monopoly on violence. And that's sort of where I lead to the idea that you do need to maintain a monopoly on violence, because as soon as you don't have one, you essentially have a gang war, right? If you had two competing security companies operating in a city, and their mandates are both to make sure that the physical safety of their members or subscribers are protected, and they get into a bar fight, and both summon help, then you pretty much have a gang war the moment that the whole violent forces collide. And so, like, there's a book I have sitting here behind me somewhere that I think Safety Dean recommended on private governance and private security that I have not yet read. So I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if there's a way to do this without a state at all, without that monopoly on violence existing. But I think that's the minimum. That's what we should at least aim to get to.
Yeah. I say that the vector is always pointing in the same direction. Like, I think no state is probably a utopian thought. So the correct way to see it is that you should, no matter how small it already is, you should still strive to make it even smaller. Because what you get left, like, I bet in Mexico that on one side there was a cartel, and on the other side was whatever organization were against the government, right? A private entity, probably dealing in herbs or something. Well, anyway, yeah, I mean, the problem with defense and the state paying for defense is like the question, how much defense? What's appropriate? And this is the Rothbardian argument, as far as I know, like that. Why would that decision making be more efficient through force? Why couldn't the free market solve that too? And I have no good answer to that. Why isn't defense? Why is that a separate good from everything else?
Yeah. So
I don't get it.
So I think there's kind of two big ways to look at defense also, because you need to look at defense against like foreign aggression. And I think that's the area where that logic on violence has shifted so profoundly and will continue to shift to the point where there will probably come a day in the not too distant future where a country with like a $200,000 drone system can be protected from the full weight of the United States military. And that shift where the cost of defense becomes so much drastically cheaper than the cost of offense will hopefully open up a lot more competition for different models of state. Because if you can protect yourself on an international scale without wasting any resources on the thought of aggressive violence outside of your country, you're saying we have a defense spend, but it's only for our country. You can make much smaller states, and with a lot more states, we can have a lot more competitive models. And so the market can actually decide where the line is. And if somebody wants to have a city with multiple competing private security apparatus, then they can do that. And if that outcompetes one with a monopoly on violence, then so be it. And inevitably there'll be others who are like, you know what, we're going to a very small state, but we're also going to do healthcare. And it's going to be entirely voluntary, but we're going to do this. And I don't think those ones will be able to compete with the ones that offer fewer services, but at least we'll be in a situation where the market can decide that. The other side of the defense is the defense of the individual, which that becomes a lot more complicated when you're dealing with, even as you had a security apparatus, whether public or private, that was good enough to protect your city. And I think there may be a case that the delivery of that kind of services may end up being private, just because the sheer usefulness of having a safe city will incentivize business leaders in that city to want to fund that kind of thing. And as the costs drop, it'll probably be actually a very cheap problem to solve, like very, very much like having a security guard in the lobby of your building. That no major companies are balking at that. They'll just pay that cost to keep themselves safer. So anyway, you may end up with cities that are, whether publicly or privately, well protected at a fairly low cost. And then you still have conflicts within the city, violence between individuals infringing upon people's rights. And I think you can get the cost of that down a lot lower by living in a capitalist society where money is free and people are free to grow their own lives. I think the obvious reason that there's so much increasing crime and depravity in the world these days is because a lot more people are finding it a lot harder to get by on the resources that they can accumulate. And so if you had a fully capitalist society, the logic on committing crimes, property crimes, violence, all goes way down because people will be happier. You're still going to have disputes. And that's kind of where the rub comes in about the monopoly on violence, I think you need one, as best as I can guess, for that point.
I think crime rates might be going up in declining Western societies, but in a lot of parts of the world, it doesn't. Like, it goes down drastically in South America and in Africa and stuff. Like, where people now all of a sudden have access to smartphones and whatnot. Like, these societies are way better off than they used to be, of course. So while it's true that crime rates are going up because of the decadence of the Western societies, like Western countries, it is dropping in elsewhere. And also, like, crime rates doesn't include taxes, which are also crimes, like inflation and counterfeiting. All of that is crime too. So, like, it's very hard to get a clear picture of how criminal a society is. But I'd say you would have to add up like crime rates and the tax burden of that country and how inflationary their currency is to get a clearer picture of how much crime is actually going on.
Yeah. And I think the kind of crime that's happening is shifting. And, you could very easily argue that the government grift is a much greater crime because they take a lot more than the guy who breaks into your car so that he can get some, no, right? But one kind of crime, like the kind of like personal and property crime, but like low scale violence, break-ins, theft kind of stuff, that kind of crime is obviously way up in every major city really that I've been to. It's a lot worse in North America than it is in Europe from what I've seen. Maybe just because I only went to the nice places in Europe, but it definitely, like, it's through the roof. Like the number of crackheads that are in every major city, it like has so massively exploded. And the amount of places where you can't really park your car because it's going to get broken into are numerous, and the security apparatus has pretty much abandoned that level of protection of property. I mean, try calling the police in any major city and saying your car got broken into. Like, do anything.
I don't care. No, which from a societal perspective might be a good thing, because it's more expensive for everyone to keep that guy in jail than to just let him steal some stuff every now and then.
Yeah. And, but human prosperity is almost perfectly correlated to our ability to harness energy. And, the Elon Musk said it pretty well on Joe Rogan last year sometime, when he was like, I don't know if you get it, but if nobody makes the stuff, there'll be no stuff. Yeah. And you can just kind of extend that to the prosperity in general. And it's just a lot harder to make anything than it used to be. It's a lot harder to harness energy to the benefit of humanity than it used to be in so many ways. And that relative lack of increasing prosperity has hit the people who are at the lowest rungs of society the most. Yeah. And their incentives now don't really line up with anything. No. So that's where you end up with all these desperate people robbing cars. And it's kind of a perfect storm to set that up. And that's part of the symptoms of that crossover from the grift outpacing the growth.
Yeah. And here I'd like to do a short rant on time preference, because it's so important to civilizational progress. So, like, the basic example is Robinson Crusoe catching fish with his hands in a pond. He can do that, and he catches X amount of fish per day by doing it with his bare hands. Like, so if he sets aside a couple of fish for later consumption and delays his gratification, which is another way to express that is that if he saves up capital, he has more time on his hands, and therefore he can start constructing a net. And when the net is done, he can catch more fish per man hour. Which is why time preference is so critical to human flourishing. That's what entrepreneurs and capitalists do. They save up capital to create something bigger in the future, delayed gratification. And that's how society progresses when people then start trading those more advanced things. This is the TLDR on that. So, but if you think about time preference, like if you think about the extremes, so if you had the highest time preference possible, that would be if everything you owned was stolen from you overnight. So you find yourself naked in the jungle. You have nothing. And you're stranded on an island somewhere. Like, what is your first, like, what happens then? Well, you need to eat, you need shelter. Like, those two things. If you don't get that in a very short amount of time, you're gonna die. Depending on where you are, you might die faster. If you're up in Sweden or Canada, you freeze your fucking balls off and you die. Like, so you need food and shelter. Easiest, quickest way to get that is to steal it. It's not a long-term good. It's not good for you long-term to do that, because there's a lot of risk involved, and it doesn't help society. But what the hell? So high time preference, bad. Low time preference, on the other hand, the more capital you have, the more options you have, the more productive you can be, and the more even longer term plans you can think. You can think in generational wealth terms and stuff, which we haven't been able to do for centuries, and now Bitcoin is here. People are actually starting to think of 5 generations down the line again, like, which is beautiful. So what happens then when you throw a thief into the equation of society? Like, you have a society and someone steals something from you. Okay, I got stolen from. I need better security. You buy better security. You buy a dog and security cameras and a better gate and maybe a gun, whatever. And then you have better security. But if this thief is legally stealing from you every single month, or every single time you buy something, or every single time you even use money, because they're allowed to counterfeit that money, then the theft becomes way, way, way harder to escape. And what it means is that everyone's time preference is increased. They get a higher time preference. They don't think about the future as much. So they make more and more short-term decisions. They think things through less and less. People become literally more stupid and make more stupid decisions because of all this scheduled theft, that is taxes, that is VAT, that is tariffs, that is inflation, all of it. All of interventionism is detrimental to societal progress in this specific way.
Yeah. I think one of my predictions that I hope will prove true is that the invention of Bitcoin, which I believe in the long term permanently removes their ability to tax us through inflation, they can still do all those other kinds of interventionism. They can still send men to your house to take some of your stuff with guns. They can still extend that violent power out to businesses and make you pay them every time you buy something at those businesses. Inflation, I think, is a little bit more insidious because they don't have to show you that they're doing right. When they put a tariff on and the price of what you're buying goes up by 50% immediately, it's very easy for somebody to take that leap and be like, oh, this is more expensive because the government is screwing me right now. Whereas with inflation, it's hidden in the background. And I think ultimately that's just going to bring the concept of taxation more to the forefront. And if the government is going to continue to spend anything even remotely close to the scale and the scope of the resources that they confiscate and consume right now, they're going to have a lot more overt taxes. And if people realize the sheer scope of what's being taken from them, combine that with the changing logic on violence and opening information networks across the world, I think it's going to make it a lot more viable for smaller states to compete for the highest value citizens. And we're already seeing that to a little extent, where people are fleeing the communist shitholes like Canada and move into the jungle where the government won't bother them as much. And so I think those are going to be the next steps, is we get out from under their sneaky tax of inflation, and then we start working on teaching people to confront the monster that is the state now that the gun is pointed more squarely at them. And that confiscation, they have to look you in the eyes before they rob you at that point.
Hello there, I'm Knut Svanholm, and I'm an international village idiot and author. These are my books on Bitcoin. Bitcoin Sovereignty Through Mathematics, Bitcoin Independence Reimagined, Bitcoin Everything Divided by 21 Million, and Bitcoin The Inverse of Clown World. These are now re-edited, redesigned, and available from the Bitcoin Infinity Store. I mean, look at that. Look at how your collection could look. It's upside down, but there they are anyway. But more than that, all of these books will be released for free, chapter by chapter, week by week on Noster. Also accompanied by a video that Luke and I will make talking about the ideas in the book, where we answer your questions, because you can sign up for the Bitcoin Infinity Academy and join courses for each and every one of the books and talk to us every now and then and get other perks, like a free set of steak knives. So go to the Bitcoin Infinity Store right now, get the books, sign up for the Academy.
The steak knives is only a maybe.
Oh, all right then. Yeah, I think the dynamics changes when we go deeper into hyper-Bitcoinization in very interesting ways. So like right now, for instance, if you have 50% of your net worth in Bitcoin, most people would view that as a big allocation, right? So like most normies would think that you're kind of insane if you have half your money in Bitcoin. But in the future, imagine if you have 99% of all your value in Bitcoin. Like some people do already today, which means that and say that your house that you have paid off and you live in, that's 1% of all you own. And the government comes, knocks on your door, takes your house. They think they took like 200% of what you owned, but they took 1%. Like, so it changes the equation completely, right? And there are so many effects like this in Bitcoin when you start to think about it, not as a fringe thing, but as the major thing. For instance, if you have this narrative of around Bitcoin mining and renewable energy. So it's viewed as a battery or a suspension mechanism where you can monetize the energy that would otherwise have been thrown away, like natural gas that's being burned, wind turbines needing to be slowed down, or that they need to stop them when the wind is blowing too much and stuff like that. Whenever we overproduce energy, it gets wasted unless you're connected to a Bitcoin miner, and voila, you've solved the problem. But scale up that thought and think about it this way instead. You have the Bitcoin miners running all the time, and that's like the wind farm is like 1% of that, which means that you only sacrifice the Bitcoin mining to energizing a society when the wind isn't blowing. Like you can do so many things with this, and you can do so many thought experiments that just blows your mind over and over again with how powerful this is when it scales.
Bitcoin should remove the government's ability to tax us in the back door through inflation, and it should make it much more difficult for them to overtly tax us with violence and violent confiscation, because it's much easier to move and much easier to protect Bitcoin from them compared to like a house and other forms of capital that we use to store value now. And yeah, like you said, it should incentivize the harnessing of energy at a scale that has never before been seen. And like I mentioned earlier, that human prosperity is directly linked to our ability to harness energy. And in the scenario that you described, the marginal cost of energy for anything non-Bitcoin related, every industrial use, everything that you can come up with that you could possibly do that's useful with energy, the marginal cost will go very close to zero. And when you tie those three things together, I think it was a Spetsky quote that from I remember him saying in Miami a few years ago, that was like, 10,000 years from now, people will look back and say the three most important technologies in human history were fire, Bitcoin, and teleportation.
Yeah, and Bitcoin can already teleport because
it teleports your capital.
Yeah, and it's an element without mass. It's just information, so it travels at the speed of information, which is insane in itself. So no, it truly is mind blowing.
And we'd be so fucked if we didn't have Bitcoin.
Yeah, we would be. No, but with Bitcoin mining and the environment, like you can build wind farms and stuff. You don't have to build them close to human settlements anymore. You can have them anywhere because you can attach a Bitcoin. This is not to like promote wind farms as a good source of energy or anything. I'm just throwing the ideas around there. I mean, back to the Robinson Crusoe example. Robinson Crusoe's fishing net is an improvement in harnessing energy. That's what it is. That's why it's so linked. He's using the same muscles to catch the fish, his arms and his legs, but they're being used more efficiently. And that's the point. That's what harnessing in the energy is all about.
Yeah. And the centrally planned community down the street who decided to use a pencil instead of a fishing net for that process will not thrive in the market.
No, but they will force you to wear a helmet in the lake. That's a good... So, conclusion, TLDR, fuck the state.
Fuck the state.
Well, I was about to ask you about something completely different in the beginning of this show, but let's go there right now instead, I think. I am going to Canada for the first time in my life in June, and I'm going to something called the Bitcoin Rodeo. Can you tell us what that is, Dave?
Yeah, the Bitcoin Rodeo is a conference that we're putting on here in Calgary, Alberta, June 28th and 29th. It's a very grassroots conference. You won't see a lot of the big name sponsors at these kind of things. You won't see any shitcoins. We do have a bunch of crossover stuff. I guess I shouldn't say you won't see any shitcoins because we do have a gold guy, but the
gold isn't a shitcoin; it's just a dumb rock.
Yeah, it's just a slightly worse form of money. So we're doing some gold crossover content. We're trying to reach out a lot to these communities that we feel are like adjacent to Bitcoin. So we've got a big sort of freedom focused community here in Alberta that was sort of stirred up over COVID and has now crystallized somewhat. And we, being in Alberta, are always looking to reach out to the oil and gas industry. Like I said, the most useful thing on earth. We have a ton of it here. We have about 600 oil companies headquartered within 10 blocks of where our conference is. So we have a pretty big oil and gas presence. And we're hoping to put on some content that will be both useful for beginners and experts, and also provocative, like hopefully this conversation we just had hopefully was. It's always good to open the podcast with like an hour-long rant about the government. Hey?
Yeah. It's an appetizer for what's to come in at Bitcoin Rodeo.
Yeah, you can get tickets at bitcoinrodeo.com, and I'm going to set up the promo code Infinity.
Yeah, great.
10% off of tickets.
Perfect. That's a very useful code if you're going to Bitcoin conferences, I hear. And Luke and I will be there, both of us. Luke is going back to his roots. I don't believe he's been out of Finland for a long time and back to Canada, but it's going to be good. We're going to be there. We're going to bring our books. We're going to bring our wit, and we're going to try to have as good a time as possible. And I think that will be very easy among that crowd. I have plenty of Canadian Bitcoiner friends, and they're all some of the best people I know on this planet, including yourself, Dave. Like this is fantastic, and I'm looking forward to this one a lot.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We've also got the SAT market that Ben DCC Sessions runs. That's happening on Friday the 27th. It's just like a flea market, farmers market with all Bitcoin vendors, and they're just amazing. I think we may have some events going on either the week before or the week after out in Bass. Beautiful place. There's a hotel out there. By the time this airs, will be open, called the Kenrick. That's a good friend of mine who's a Bitcoiner owns, and you actually get 20% off if you pay in Bitcoin at the hotel. So I imagine we'll get you out there while you're here. And
fantastic. I'd love to see it. Yeah. Luke has been saying a lot of good things about it. So yeah, I remember that from my childhood. There was sometimes when there were, like, we only had state-funded television, right? So there was 2 channels, both state-funded, and they decided what programs were on and at what time. And occasionally there were English-speaking programs, and some of them said, when the program was over, it said Thames, like the River Thames in London, the Thames, and some of them said BBC, and occasionally they said Banff. And I wonder, what is that word? And why do they say, what is this? So it wasn't until years later that I figured out it was a place in Canada. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. It's a crazy little mountain town that you're right in the middle of the mountains, and one of the most beautiful places on earth that everybody should visit. But it's very touristy. But I'd highly recommend the Kenrick Hotel. It's going to have a sauna, spa, cold plunge experience once it opens up. So it'll be pretty great.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. There will be saunas in Helsinki too.
I will be in Helsinki in August.
Yeah, you will. And so we're joining forces here across the Atlantic, and seeing the perks of each one of these cold countries. I'm running out of words here, Dave, as you can hear. So thanks very much for coming on. Other than Bitcoin Rodeo, is there anywhere else you want to send our listeners? Like anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, everybody can follow me. I am Bitcoin Brains on most platforms, Telegram, Twitter, whatnot. And you can also find some of my important accomplishments on bitcoinbrains.com.
Yeah, there's a list of beautiful steaks you've eaten there, and I love it.
Yeah.
And also in your history you have a history with Bull Bitcoin. We had Francis on not too long ago. A great conversation with him too, and they have just launched in Europe, so they are expanding, and I love to see it.
Yeah, and Mexico is happening now as well with Bull, and yeah, if you're in any of those places, it's the most hardcore Bitcoin exchange in the world. There's no close second, and
there is no second best.
Thanks.
Thanks, Abe. Always great to have you on. This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Thanks for listening.